Okay, I think we can start. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this afternoon session. My name is Gosia Mikołajczak, and I'm a research fellow at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership. And I'll be making sure that we don't run out of time in this session, and also that we have some time for Q&A with the questions from the audience towards the end of the session. If you have a question for one of our guests, please drop it in the Zoom chat using the Q&A feature. To begin the session, I would like to introduce the speakers. Please welcome Jai Tao from the Men's Project at Jesuit Social Services and Kyrie Sinclair from YMCA.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us here for this Unpacking the Man Box session. My name is Tao. As Gosia has just said, I work for the Men's Project, part of Jesuit Social Services, where we look to explore these ideas around masculinity and how we might be able to create a culture where we shift towards healthier masculinities in our society. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on here today and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So today, what we're going to share with you is the findings that we did on our Manbox research to have a good look at sort of masculinity in Australia. We looked at a sort of a broad range of participants that took part in that survey. We'll share that research with you today. We'll discuss what the Manbox is, how we can challenge it, and how we can shift towards healthier masculinities to a small degree. And then we're also going to explore a case study. We'll spend some time in the latter part of this presentation where we're going to talk to Gary about his participation in one of our programs and how he uses that in his workplace and with his team. First of all, some of the topics that we might touch on might involve suicide, might involve depression, might involve some challenging sort of topics. So if any of this is triggering, feel free to just step away from your computer at all, or perhaps, reach out to support. We have Lifeline, we have 1-800-RESPECT. So please do reach out for support if anything is upsetting you about this presentation. So I'm going to move fairly quickly through the initial part of this so that we can have plenty of time for question and answer and a discussion around this. But first of all, let's just say the work that we do exists within Change the Story, the Our Watch Change the Story, and we are looking to challenge actions and the gender drivers of violence. Particularly, we are challenging gender stereotypes and gender roles that can contribute to violence against women and children, also sexual harassment, sexist behavior, risk-taking behaviors, men's own well-being outcomes like poor mental health and depression, suicide, these sorts of things. So we are quite broadly looking at this idea about masculinity and what things we can do to challenge it and shift away from that. But it does exist within Our Watch's Change the Story actions that we can take to prevent violence. So wherever you are watching this today, I'm just going to start with this little activity. Most of it won't be so interactive, but this is where we're going to sort of present a metaphor for how we might talk about masculinity and how it sort of exists within our culture. So wherever you are, I'd just like you to fold your arms, just the way, I'll just shift my computer here so you can see what I'm doing, but basically just fold your arms as though you were standing around with your arms folded. Bear with me with this. I want you to then unfold your arms and then go back and fold them again. And chances are you probably fold your arms the way you always do. You have an arm fold technique that you do, and this is pretty much the way you do it. That neural pathway has been developed, and that's the way you do it. So what I want you to do then, because I've got my right hand on my bicep, my left hand is underneath, and my left hand is tucked in behind my right bicep. I want to swap that. So I'm going to put my left hand on my bicep and fold the other one in. So I do my reverse arm fold. And we do this no matter where we go in any of the presentations that we give. And we say to them like, okay, well, how does that feel now? And if we're doing this in a high school somewhere or something like that, the kids would report back to us, oh man, that feels really awkward. That feels unnatural. It feels weird. And they're the kind of, that's the kind of feedback that we get from that. So you can unfold your arms now if you haven't done so already. I would then ask them, so, okay, well, who taught you to fold your arms the other way? Who taught you to fold your arms the way you do it? And they might think for a while and think, well, nobody really taught me that. I just copied a behavior. I saw it, I practiced it over and over again, and now that's just the way I do it. I do it unconsciously. I don't really think about it. That's just the way I do it. And I would say, okay, cool. Well, do you have any other behaviors that you don't necessarily know where you picked them up. You didn't necessarily choose them for yourself, but that's just the way you do it now, and you just do it on automatic pilot. And then we might say, well, this can be a little metaphor then for how we sort of adopt and take on masculinity into our lives. Generally speaking, we don't pull little boys aside and tell them, okay, well, here are all the terms and conditions for masculinity. Can you agree to abide by these for the duration of your life? It's not like taken on board like this. It's taken on board very subtly, very sort of subconsciously. It's just absorbed into us by osmosis through the things that we see, the things that we read, the music that we listen to, the movies we watch, anything like that. So we could say then that this, like the man box then, is this sort of collection of attributes or character traits that we deem befitting of men. And if I want to live up to being a real man, I need to embody and promote and enact these qualities within myself, and that will give me validation as a man. So we could suggest then, if we have this these ideas around what a real man should be, we ask these questions if it's like to 12-year-old boys right up to, sometimes I teach at the Sons of the West program, working with an older demographic of men over 55, up to sort of 70, 75. We get that same list of qualities that we feel are befitting of men, things like being strong, tough, athletic, confident, muscular, in control, self-sufficient, these sorts of things. And we could say then that, like, well, this is this collection of ideas that we feel like we live up to our manhood through. But if somebody didn't embody those qualities, or chose to reject those qualities, or felt as just those qualities didn't suit who they were as a person, then those who adhere to that that narrative, that sort of strict and rigid narrative around masculinity, might start calling those other people certain things. And we will hear taunts against them if they don't live up to that manhood, things like being called a girl or being called gay, and it goes on, pussy, homo, fag, weak, bitch. We see all of these qualities thrown around so flippantly, so easily. And it suggests then that if you don't toe the line with this idea of masculinity, then we are going to try and emasculate you by calling you certain things. And as we can see here, a lot of the terms that commonly get used refer to either being female or part of her body, or being same-sex attracted, suggesting then that this idea that perhaps this heterosexual male is at the top of this food chain and that everybody else exists somewhere underneath that. And it's from this idea that if we that's the sort of terms that we're using to put people down, that they are lesser than this idea of this heterosexual male at the top. And we believe that this is where the gateways for violence exist. If you can dehumanize someone or put their value as lesser than your own, the opportunity for violence and bullying and intimidation and mocking and humiliating starts to exist because you considered those people lesser than you. So it's very important that we understand that even the language that polices the man box and polices this idea of masculinity is really does huge amounts to influence the culture that it exists within. Sorry, that's automatic playing. Here is a video of our research that was done. We did a survey, and the video will explain exactly how the survey came about and who was surveyed. And it'll give you an insight into the data that we collected by asking about young men, Australian men, about their masculinity, how they interpreted their gender role. And we also asked them questions about their mental health and well-being as well. So have a listen to the findings of this study.
The Men's Project asked 1,000 Australian men aged 18 to 30 about the pressures to be a real man. The pressure to be tough, to be the breadwinner, to always be in control, and to have many sexual partners. It's these rules that make up the man box, and there are more people in there than you might think. When asked about these rules, 2/3 of those surveyed said they were taught a real man behaves a certain way. 47% believe they should act strong, even when scared or nervous. A third believe men should be the primary provider for their families. And 37% believe they should know their partner's whereabouts at all times. Adhering to these rigid norms and stereotypes that make up the man box can be unhealthy and harmful. Young men inside the man box are those who more strongly believe in the man box rules. Compared to young men who are outside of the man box, these young men report poorer mental health and have a variety of behavioural issues that are harmful for them and others, particularly women. For example, 44% of those inside the man box reported suicidal thoughts in the previous 2 weeks, compared to 22% of young men outside the man box. 47% perpetrated physical violence in the past month, compared to 7%. 46% made sexual comments to a woman or girl they didn't know, compared to 7%. 31% get drunk once a month or more, compared to 22%. And finally, 38% have been in a car accident in the past year, compared to 11% of those outside the man box. Improving the health and well-being of our boys and men requires action across our entire community, but it starts with each of us thinking about the expectations, attitudes and behaviours that we communicate to our sons, brothers, mates and partners. Let's all break free from the man box and give boys and men the freedom to be the person they want to be.
So having a look at some of those statistics that we found there, if we would just cast our eyes here to the middle, there, the man box rules, we would look at the 7 main pillars that make up masculinity, like acting tough, self-sufficiency, using aggression and control, etc. If we look over to the left-hand side of the screen here, in the survey, this was the statistics or the percentages where the participants felt as though society was giving them this message. This was the pressures they felt they were receiving. Whereas over on the right-hand side of this, there was the personal endorsement of these character traits, values, attributes, and etc. So we can see that it is significantly less. It's not personally endorsed quite as much as men feel the pressure from society to uphold these certain character traits. So we feel as though that's our sort of room to move. That's our room to work within this framework to sort of, promote healthier masculinities. If less are buying into that social message, then we feel like we can work with that. But if we look at, say, the lowest percentage here on the right-hand side of the screen, being at 20%, 20% of young men feel as though they can use aggression and control or violence to get respect if necessary or get what they want. That's still 1 in 5 there. So we have our work cut out for us. We have a lot to do with changing our culture around this, but certainly I think it's pleasing that the personal endorsement of these ideas is much less. When we look at these statistics, though, and we look at this as a sliding scale as well. The left-hand side of the screen here with men who strongly identify with these rigid gender norms and rigid ideas around their masculinity, as opposed to the guy on the right-hand side of there, which is less adhering to these traditional norms. We can see that as we move away from them, the percentages of thoughts of suicide, physical violence, sexual harassment, bullying, risk-taking behaviors, addictions significantly decrease. So we can suggest that like this embodying healthier traits of masculinity certainly affect each of those things. So we can say that those things are outcomes of this strict adherence to masculinity. And that's probably important to say at this point, as though not everything that exists inside the man box is in and of itself really, really negative. There's nothing wrong with being strong. There's nothing wrong with being confident. And there'll be times in your life where you need to be those things, regardless of your gender. But the man box sort of suggests that these are the qualities and attributes that must always be lived up to the exclusion of other qualities and attributes, and that you must embody these to be considered a real man. So yeah, it's not necessarily that every single specific trait of masculinity is inherently bad, because it's not. It's the way they get embodied as a collective and then enacted as a collective that can be harmful. So in the workplace, as we wanted to sort of focus a little bit here on this, I did look at a study that was done in the US. Now, this wasn't randomly selected as well. It was an opt-in study, so that can sort of produce some biases that we can see. But in workplaces where there's a combative culture, where it's very, it's competitive, it's very promotion sort of driven, like climbing the ladder. Where sexist behaviors, and in those environments, sexist behaviors do tend to thrive a bit. People may want to say something against that. Yeah, other men may want to intervene and say something, but they actually feel disempowered to do so because of the nature of that culture, which is kind of hypermasculine, inhibits them from doing that. Now, there's a concept called, which it's written here on the screen as masculine anxiety, something I know as masculine discrepancy strain, where men feel as though they're not able to quite live up to this expectation of what like manhood is. So they feel this kind of their sort of self-value and self-worth drops in their interpretation of themselves, and it inhibits them from stepping up and saying things in these cases. So where they're likely to see bullying, intimidation, sexist behaviors and sexist comments and misogyny in the workplace, they're less likely to say something because of they're already feeling as though they're not living up to certain expectations around manhood. We certainly see that where the stronger that culture is there, the more likely it is for them to not say anything. So that sort of competitive, aggressive, hierarchical structures, climbing the ladder, career advancement is a focus. These cultures allow this sort of man box to thrive. It's a very sort of patriarchal kind of framework in there, and the man box thrives in this space. As we can see then, like this praise, admiration, and reward result from this playing out of man box and masculine behaviors. Now, this might not also be limited to men alone, right? Like this is the masculine culture is not limited to men. It's sometimes performed by women in those cultures as well. That same aggressive ladder climbing kind of attitude can be brought in, where those aggressive behaviors get rewarded. So all people in those environments tend to, enact those things. But this limits massively those people who don't adhere to this kind of thing, or whose personality does not suit this kind of thing. So where these gender norms are like really strong, we do see the like bullying and workplace sexism increase. So those kind of character traits there, then, as we say at the bottom, they're controlling, and they sort of point towards sort of controlling and aggressive behaviors, which were kind of pillars of that masculinity that we referred to before when we were looking for the center of that, using aggression and control, acting tough, having this bravado, overconfident, self-sufficient. These are all pillars that define masculinity. And so in those kind of workplaces, then these kind of cultures are going to get rewarded and promoted. As we say, then acting tough and aggression and control, we've got them listed up here again, the different masks of masculinity. I would say that acting tough, using aggression and control and self-sufficiency to a degree, thinking that like, I can do this on my own, I don't need help, I don't need to reach out for support or help with anything. Sometimes these character traits are actually rewarded in workplace culture. And that's kind of the area of sort of masculinity in the workplace, which those two main pillars, but also self-sufficiency to a degree, which can start to influence that dynamic. We need to create workplaces or workspaces where everybody feels safe and respected at their work, where they can feel like they can come to work, be their authentic selves, and contribute equally. Therefore, we need to create environments where people are treated kindly, where they're treated safely, and where they're treated fairly. And I think these are sort of the sort of pillars of then respect, if we like. If we've got the pillars of masculinity, then the pillars of respect would be being treated showing respect is being kind, it's being safe, and it's being fair. If you can say that you're being kind, safe, and fair in your attitudes and your behaviors and your conduct, then you can't really be disrespecting anybody. So if we can create workplaces that are kind, safe, and fair, where everybody can come together and bring their best selves into that workplace, and that is nurtured and supported, we can then sort of start to create a workplace where healthier identities can shine through. If people are given the permission and the freedom to be themselves without this sort of constant pressure to adhere to certain stereotypical norms that validate them and allow them to be taken seriously, and create a work culture that's very you know, aggressive and dog eat dog and backstabbing in a way that, you know, I mean, that is an extreme, but like it's in those spaces where this idea can thrive. So if we're going to challenge that space, we need to create spaces that are, you know, have kindness, safety, and fairness as their sort of underpinning, you know, attributes that are a part of that environment and that workplace. And that's how we can shift towards promoting healthier masculinities, which will probably suit the majority, even those men who like might toe the line a little bit with the pressures that they get from society to adhere to those roles. If they're given opportunities to step away from that and given examples of what that looks like, we believe that they will, knowing that like on those percentages that we looked at, that the pressures that they feel from society are not necessarily as much personally endorsed. If we give men spaces where they can shift towards healthier masculinities and show up as their true and authentic self, we think that they will, especially if those environments look safe and inviting. So last year, towards the end of last year, we did we ran our programs, Unpacking the Man Box and Modeling Respect and Equality, in a contributor workforce, people working with the social workers, youth workers, people working in the justice system. And we wanted to sort of basically build greater awareness in their workforce around stereotypical masculine norms and how they might impact the environment. And then how can we sort of promote healthier masculinities and create this shift towards healthier masculinities? So we worked with the YMCA, Star Health Community Hubs, and Wyndham Neighbourhood House. We had 92 participants in total. Some of those went on to do the deeper dive into modelling respect and equality, but all of them undertook, and it was done on Zoom. It was in that sort of the context of COVID last year. So it was all online presentations, but we did Unpacking the Man Box workshops with them, which sort of looked at, again, that research that we just briefly shared there, what healthier masculinities look like, emotional intelligence and social learning, the theory of planned behavior, which is a framework that was used in the QUIT campaign, was also used in the Do the Right Thing campaign in Australia, and I do believe in seatbelts as well, encouraging people to wear seatbelts back in the day. So it's a sort of framework for behavior change that has been shown to be and proven to be successful. We also looked at sort of upstanding and the bystander intervention and how we can intervene on man box behaviours showing up and how we can intervene on those effectively, and also ignite this change towards healthier masculinities and promote that. We found that people self-reported that they had an increased awareness of stereotypical norms and how they might impact environments and dynamics, social dynamics. We found that there were encouraging increases in their willingness to work with men and boys around these attitudes and behaviours and how they might be able to bring about change. I think they felt a lot more confident to have these conversations. We saw increases in sort of their ability to influence this change as well. And then finally, a strong willingness to want to know how to engage men and how to sort of have conversations around promoting healthier masculinity and what sort of healthier masculinities look like. It's such a new field of research that we're still in this, I guess, in a playful stage at the moment of trying to figure out what does healthier masculinities look like and how can we create shifts in culture to gravitate towards this. What does it look like? What does it not look like? And we've got that established with the man box idea, but how do we create the incentive to shift? How do we make it look attractive enough to shift away from these outdated modes of gender norms? Some of the participants of that, we've got Gary here from the YMCA today, and we'll talk to him, but some in Star Health used it in men's behaviour change programs, stuff that they learned in Unpacking the Man Box, integrated directly into men's behaviour change programs. Some have in the community houses have used it in men's support groups. So the outcomes of participating in the course is actually going out there at a grassroots level and getting out to the community, which we were very happy with. Here is our work around this, similar to what we offered to the contributor workforce, and you'll see Gary and another couple of participants in it. This was used, this video here talks about this program, and this was used in the government's Free from Violence campaign, the second action plan that is just about to sort of it is already being unrolled, about engaging men. That's the new sort of focus for the Free from Violence campaign. Have a watch of this video. And
I'm Matt Tyler. I lead the men's project at Jesuit Social Services, where we've worked for over 40 years with men and boys. Men and boys who are oftentimes in crisis. One of our first pieces of work was our man box research. And one of the really key findings from that work was that men who are in the man box conform to ideas like real men have to act tough, real men sort out problems on their own. To be a real man, you have to assert aggression and control in your relationships. Men who conform to these man box ideas were over 20 times as likely to self-report sexually harassing a woman, over 14 times as likely to self-report using physical violence, and they weren't doing that well themselves either. They were over twice as likely to experience suicidal ideation. Modelling Respect and Equality, or the MORE program, is about preventing violence by addressing stereotypical ideas about what it means to be a man. And we're equipping a really diverse set of folks who work with men and boys every day. Educators, youth workers, social workers, role models with the skills, knowledge and confidence to engage with the men and boys they work with to address these harmful man box attitudes.
Our core business is to try and reduce reoffending in young people, and we do that through a number of training and employment programs in prison and the community. The attraction of the program for us was the ability to get some skills and knowledge that might help us positively impact on the behaviours of the cohort of people we're dealing with. I think in terms of masculinity, everyone's got a different perception of what's positive and negative. I think getting past some of those biases, whether people know them or not, and learning a positive, proactive way of actually dealing with it was something that we were attracted to learn.
After the MORE program, people feel motivated to start having these conversations, and they feel like they've probably got some more skills to have these conversations in constructive and meaningful ways.
The program was absolutely amazing, and it really has changed my perspective on how I look at family violence and the importance of engaging boys and men as part of that discussion.
There was nothing like this around for me when I was a young man struggling with certain aspects of my own masculinity, particularly around sort of maybe emotional stoicism and that need to be tough and confident and in control all the time, solving my problems with violence and that sort of thing. So maybe we can change this narrative a little bit so that if we broaden our understanding of what masculinity is, give men sort of permission and choices about the kind of men that they want to be and the character traits and attributes that they can embody as men, we can shift away from that very limited narrative that we're dished up that can lead to things like violence.
Every day you hear of a woman that's a victim of violence, and it's just heart-wrenching. It's really important that we have these discussions and talk about things that really impact on all families in our community.
I don't think there's ever a point where you stop learning. I think you should actively look to do it, and I think that's one of those areas that's key.
We need to work together to solve domestic violence.
Ultimately, we want to see a society free from violence where women and children particularly are safe. And in order to do that, we've got to engage with men and boys so that they can live flourishing lives where they can show up as their best selves and reach their full potential.
I do this work so that, the next generation can have that which I didn't get. Because happy people don't hurt people.
Always fun to watch yourself on camera, isn't it, Gary? So joining us here today is Gary Sinclair from the YMCA. Gary was a participant in the contributor workforce workshops that we did. Gary sat in on the Unpacking the Man Box series, as well as doing the MORE program, which is the Modelling Respect and Equality that we just referred to there in the video. And so we've got Gary here to join us today to talk a little bit more about that. So Gary, I'll start with, can you share with us a little bit about the stereotypical man box behaviours that you encounter in your work in the justice system?
Thanks, Hal. Look, as we said, our core business is trying to reduce reoffending principally in young men aged under 28. We do that through a number of employment and training programs in custody in the community. And typically the culture we're confronted with is that one that you described yourself, in terms of that very strong masculinity-driven culture, very hierarchical and the like. We're very conscious that that environment is typified by a group of people that are constantly regulated in all their behaviours, directed what they should do and how they should do it. So we've been very conscious from the start and finding approach, other than looks like we're dictating or lecturing people in how they should behave or what they should believe in.
Yeah.
So for us, it was more a case of us looking at ourselves in the first instance to try and ensure that we were being the best role models for people that probably hadn't had a positive role model before. So starting small and trying to make sure every aspect of what we do, however small or minor, was representative of positive action or a positive attitude. So that's everything from looking at the language we use through to the behaviours that we have.
How then, like, are you sort of, when you're approaching these boys, obviously they're in the sort of the justice system, there's probably a certain level of adherence to these gender norms that they're going to need to uphold, considering, I mean, we can talk about the idea of sort of, men embracing vulnerability and embracing openness, but in certain environments like that can become very, very difficult. So how do you balance your engagement with them and where they're at, and then how you go about discussing these ideas around, masculine norms and, broadening their understanding perhaps of masculinity? How do you bridge that gap? Yeah.
Well, I think it's just sowing a seed is probably, without being corny, is probably the best way to describe it. I'm lucky a greater percentage of my team, even in the prisons that we operate in, are female. So we're given the opportunity to walk the walk. So, the way we interact amongst ourselves, the work environments we operate in terms of everything from what we might have as signage through to the way we talk to each other.
Excellent.
And we're really conscious of the fact that we're not experts. So, for example, in our weekly toolbox, we'll bounce our ideas around, particularly what we're not doing well. Dumb mistakes we might have made, situations we weren't sure how to react to, how to enact, and try and share each other experience as part of it.
Excellent. And I think that's really the key with this sort of this space right now is like this narrative has probably been the consistent narrative for so long. And now we're sort of exploring these ideas of stepping away from this. But it's really important for us all to be able to put out there that we haven't got the answers yet. We need to have that sort of dialogue and that discussion around having a look at certain things. And then how do we manage this? How could we have done this better? How is this, how are these things informed by the man box, and what we might be able to do to interrupt them? And I think that's really great that we're having this kind of, your team is having this rich dialogue around this as well, because that is it. We are all just we're working this out. And whilst we sort of, we have to ensure that, men and boys are held accountable for their behaviors, we don't want to sort of scare anybody away or dictate to them or tell them what, have it this sort of wagging the finger approach of shame and blame, where we're not going to have them come to the table at all. I guess it's like creating this dialogue is, again, like I was saying before, creating that space where it is safe and it is kind and it's fair and it's cooperative and collaborative, where we can kind of unravel this, unravel the complexities of this masculinity so that we can get to the bottom of this. And I think there'll be a lot of trial and error in that as well. Do you think? How is that received both in your team and with the people that you work with? How do you feel like that dialogue is going? With the people that you're working with, addressing these kind of man box issues? Is it well received? Is it what kind of pushback do you get?
Oh, look, within the team, it's something that you've got to constantly be doing. We're very conscious of the fact that we've got to keep working at it. So we make sure we include discussions along how we can get better regularly. Like I said, not just in our weekly team meetings, but in our monthly meetings as well, where we go into things in a bit more detail. And we're not afraid to admit we get things wrong. I suppose that's a big thing. I mean, even at the most basic level, I'd use the term guys all the time. So I get slapped around the ear at its most basic level for that. But it's funny, probably one of the key aspects of what we do is placing people into employment when they leave prison. And one of the things we look for is someone that has a genuine motivation to want to change.
Yeah.
And one of the things we find is probably the single greatest one, once again, without being corny, is that young men saying the reason they want to get a job and hold a job is because they don't want to disappoint mum. They don't want to let their wife or partner down, and they want to set an example for their kids. So the motivation's there. It's just trying to find a way where they can embrace that and actually believe it, want to do it without feeling threatened.
Awesome. That's great. It sounds like you're doing incredible work there with the YMCA. Thanks for coming in and talking with us. I might get you to hang on as well. We've got question and answer now, and we'll put question and answer over to the group participating. And there may be some questions directed to you and your work in this space. So I guess, put some questions in the Q&A if you've got some. Goss, you might be able to relay those on to us. And certainly, let me just put out here in front that if there's any questions around the research, how we conducted the research, that's not my area. I'm a facilitator and presenter. That Matt, our director, was going to be here today, and he's very much involved in the research area of that. So if there's any kind of questions that, please do email them to this address that you can see on there, and those kind of questions will be answered by them. I'm sort of more on the sort of ground level, working with like Gary. We're working with young men and boys around these issues of masculinity and gender. So any of those kind of questions, please forward to me. But around the how we did the research and how we conducted the surveys and how we got the demographic that we surveyed, all of that could be answered by Matt.
Thank you, Tao, and thank you, Gary, for this interesting discussion. We have 2 questions from the audience, but if anyone else would like to ask their questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. So the first question is, how do we raise the awareness in multicultural settings where patriarchal society behavior is prevalent or deeply seated? And what can we do in order to stop these beliefs impacting workplace behaviors?
Yeah. Okay. With the first one, the research that we put out, the survey that was done, it was done in Australia. It was actually conducted by an American group called Promundo. In Australia, we surveyed the 18 to 30-year-old demographic of 1,000 boys and men, and it was we did look to get, we did handpick so that we got a broad range of age and location. Beyond that, ethnicity, sexual orientation, all of those things that may have been answered anonymously throughout the survey, they were more random. But we did get a very broad spectrum of people, of all sorts of people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnicity, age, location, etc. This survey was also done in Canada, the US, Mexico, Costa Rica, and the UK. We have gone on to do also further research now with the Australian African community here. We've also just finished a research with adolescents in conjunction with the Islamic Council of Victoria, looking at young Muslims in Australia as well, and getting their interpretation of gender roles, masculinity, and that sort of thing. So we are trying to get as broader demographic as we can to get this out there too. And we have found that whilst there might be subtle cultural differences within some of those environments, there is generally that same, nothing has shaken those 7 main pillars of masculinity, regardless of what culture and ethnicity we've put it in. You might get certain things, let's say, for example, Brazilian men. It is very acceptable in Brazilian culture and even in macho culture in Brazil for men to cry openly and express their emotions openly. So whilst they still uphold ideas around being tough, being confident, being in control, being the provider for their family, being like athletic and good looking is a sort of a strong pillar of masculinity in Brazilian culture. The emotional stoicism and keeping one's feelings hidden away is not. So sometimes we might see that there is one pillar that sort of falls away a little bit in that culture, but generally speaking, we find that it's quite broad. But we are always looking to do, the Men's Project on two hands is in one hand trying to do the grassroots work and create that sort of change in culture. And it's also in high quality research and analyzing data on another. And we're always looking to push into different areas that might have been neglected in these studies. So different ethnicities and different cultures is one of those. Sorry, Gossi, what was the second question in reference to?
So I guess that was just a follow-up to this question. What can we do about the impacts of this on workplace behaviors? But it seems like you answered the question. Yeah.
I think that we can, or certainly what we can do is we can start to open discussions around what healthier masculinities is and what it looks like. I certainly think that when we do one little exercise, which we won't do for the sake of this presentation, but I'll give you the gist of it, is that we ask people to think of a man that they admire and respect in their life, someone they look up to and someone they feel like has really worthy of great admiration. And we ask them, just list a couple of qualities that person might have. We get that from, and again, we do this from young men, sort of 14, 15-year-old men, all the way up to anybody that might be participating at any age group. And we always get consistent answers. They're things like, they're very supportive, they're very trustworthy, they're good listeners, they're very humble, they're kind, caring, compassionate, considerate, loyal. And we get this same list, no matter whether they're generous, all of that. And then I might say to them, it's like, okay, well, given this list of things there, could you actually just sort of separate these into the masculine and the feminine qualities there? And when we look at them and when they try to break these into different groups, they can't. These are human qualities that we all look up to and admire in others. And instead, I sort of suggest to them, it's like, well, one thing we never get on this board when I ask them and write these things up, we never get, oh, they're very emotionally stoic and they never actually express how they're feeling. They use belligerence and aggression and intimidation to solve their problems. They're always acting tough. They put on this persona of being overconfident. We never ever get qualities like this that people are looking up to. And it would suggest then that the qualities that we admire and those that we look up to in other people are actually not only human qualities, they're not qualities that you would typically associate with masculinity and manhood. And then we could say, well, healthier masculinities might look like adopting those kind of character traits and those attributes at the core of our being, rather than these ones that are dished up to us, this narrative around masculinity. If these are the character traits that we truly respect and admire, if we admire those in others, it would probably be safe to assume that those people might admire those qualities and character traits in us. So can we embody those at the core of our identity rather than these masculine norms? And perhaps that's sort of a beginning on how we can, shift towards this idea of promoting a culture and personalities and identities that support healthier masculinities rather than these unhealthier traits that tend to lead to these very harmful outcomes for the men themselves and for the people that they share relationships with.
We have another question in the chat. That's about the potential impacts of pornography. Do you think the early exposure and or addiction to porn impacts young men's relationship with desired sex, particularly women, and promotes unhealthy masculinity, including control,
Absolutely.
aggression, hypersexuality? If so, how can we combat this?
That's a whole area of research in itself, and I absolutely agree. It does. I mean, pornography is absolutely unrealistic, and I feel it's also very dangerous. This is not really a central area of our work. We work in a lot of schools, which can sometimes be a little bit touchy on approaching this subject, and I think that's sad because it's a really important subject to approach in regards to this topic. We also understand that the nature of dopamine reward has seen pornography become very, very extreme over the last 50 years. And it is heading in a direction that promotes quite harmful behavior, quite harmful treatment of women. It promotes rape culture. It promotes lack of consent all the time, incest, and they carry on. And it is believed that, and it's becoming a lot more violent. And it is believed that the way dopamine reward system works within the human brain is pushing the boundaries of this further and further and further back. And so it is actually something that really absolutely needs attention. It's not only impacting young men's ideas around women and around sex and relationships that are of a sexual nature, it also impacts young women's ideas around sex and their interpretations of how they should be in sexual relationships. So typically, pornography definitely promotes a male as a dominant in that scenario, and a woman as a subservient or a performer in that scenario. And young people are getting messages around sex that are like this. So yes, I believe there's a huge amount of work needs to be done in this area. It's not enough is being done. It is outside the scope of what we're doing at the Men's Project. I would hope that in the future this will become a more included part of our narrative and all of the work that's done in this area of healthier masculinities. But at this stage, not enough is being done. I absolutely agree. We need to do more.
Can you say a bit more about the work you do for schools? It seems that our audience members are interested in that, especially high schools.
Yes. So we there's in Victorian schools, I do believe that it's now a requirement of Victorian schools to be involved in the Respectful Relationships program, and we slot into there in sort of I don't exactly know, but I think it's topics 6 and 7, which are around gender and also around sexuality. And so we do a lot of work in schools, and that actually is increasing more and more. The Department of Education are recognizing the value of the work that we're doing, and we're getting more and more opportunity to work in schools, which is great. We essentially deliver the Unpacking the Man Box workshops. We do this for staff as well as students. We have found that as we go in there and speak to students, that's great. They might listen to you for a 50-minute presentation. They may even agree with you and with what you're saying. But if not enough is done to change the culture within the school, and that sort of comes from the staff level where they can continue to monitor, how maybe masculine behaviors are playing out in an unhealthy way in the schoolyard, in the school classrooms and things. If the teachers aren't involved in this process, then we're not going to get through to the students. But we do believe that, this kind of change, this cultural shift takes a long time. And as we are still working out what this looks like, how we can create this shift, but it's probably going to be a generational thing. So the more work that we can do with the younger generation now, hopefully we can create this shift. So there's a lot of work to be done with already the adult community, but hopefully we can start shifting the narrative so that as this generation arrives in adulthood, we are already dealing with these issues. These issues have already been dealt with up front. So yes, we're trying to do more and more work in schools, and that's where our work lies. We're certainly trying to engage staff of schools. That's a really important part, and that's what's been supported by the Education Department as well. So yeah, hopefully we'll be seeing more and more work of this as well.
We have another question that might be a bit cheeky and relates to what you said earlier. Does it make sense to call it masculinity if the character traits you described are universal to all humans?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we actually now I'm referring to it more as healthier identities rather than healthier masculinities. And that but what we don't want to do, I guess, is in a way is we have to start where we're at. And that's, and I think that when we're if we're looking at the scale of all men are here like this, we've got 10% have probably already made this shift. People like myself and Gary, we see the value in what we're doing, what work we're doing here. We see the value of this in society and in culture, and we're on board and we'll do whatever we can to make that shift. 80% are sitting in the middle that are just the swayable middle. They probably haven't had these conversations before. They probably haven't even had a good look at how masculinity plays out in their own lives and how it plays out in our culture. Haven't really thought about it. So if we can, talk to the masses there and get that sort of shift to move towards healthier masculinities, then that's where predominantly our work lies. At the other end of the scale, you'll have that 10% of people who just won't shift on these things. They just believe we're wrong. We're turning the world into a bunch of sissies is the kind of pushback that we get quite typically, and they are not going to shift on this. But we don't want to concentrate on that 10% that's shifting their mindset. We want to work on this movable middle in the 80% in the middle and just gradually shift culture towards this healthier identities. Then we're in a position where we can kind of break down the narrative between, femininity and masculinity and also we recognize that, people identify in a broad spectrum of genders. They identify with gender in a very broad way, and it is not classified into this, feminine, masculine, male, female kind of biological sex kind of thing. But we are working predominantly with a men's project. We're working with men, and we're looking to shift those behaviors and attitudes that, are, I guess, in a way, predominant in society. They are the dominant masculine narrative, and many of the men that we are dealing with identify as cis heterosexual male, and we're looking to sort of change their ideas around that manhood so that, you know, there is more freedom in there for them, and more safety and respect for others who don't subscribe to that. So, yeah.
I would like to go back to your definition of healthy identity, healthy masculinity, or healthy identity. There are 7 pillars to it. Do you find in your work that men are willing to accept some elements of it, but are more resistant to others?
Yeah, I do. And I think that it shows up in different ways. When I showed that graphic there where it had the man in the box and the cartoon one, the guy out of the box, and everything decreases as we shift away from this like rigid adherence to masculine norms, I think of that as a sliding scale as well. And I know this in my own life. Like, there are some that I just completely have like pillars of masculinity that I've completely abandoned. I just think that is ridiculous. I don't subscribe to that at all. Whereas others, I find myself falling back into it. I think of it, I've done it. That's a very masculine behavior. I'm really still adhering to this. And it's through that kind of just that willingness to have a look and notice that I catch myself sometimes. And I realize, even in the work that I do with all of the, the spiel that I give every day in my presentations, I still catch myself doing certain things. So it's sometimes you may shift on some things. It may be more deeply ingrained, or more, that neural pathway or that behavior is so deeply rooted. It's subtle and it's harder to shift. So I feel like it's a process. And as Gary said, even in the interview, we're always in a like, it's a new topic. We're all exploring this for the first time, and things will reveal themselves to us right the way down the track. But yeah, I think it's also important to say, I did say this in the presentation, that not everything in and of itself, character traits of masculinity, are inherently bad, and certainly not exclusive to men. Women women uphold masculine norms as well. I think that we will, and I think women have been given more freedom in the current climate to adopt both masculine and feminine behaviors and have a broader spectrum of attributes and qualities that they embody, whereas men are still encouraged to only adopt the masculine ones and not adopt anything that would be considered feminine. They're still looking to try and distance themselves from those feminine qualities. We can have a conversation about, let's put on a seminar for men and vulnerability, something like that, and see how many men show up to that thing. We can say that we probably won't get a great deal of men rocking up to that. So there are still these certain qualities where men are kind of trying to keep them at bay and push them away, and still, adhere to others. But yeah, hopefully we can start breaking those down so that there isn't that distinction between masculine qualities, feminine qualities. They're just human qualities that are befitting of you and your authentic self, and that those aren't judged by others. A lot of the adherence to particular qualities and attributes is because men will be perhaps attacked or marginalized by their own peer group if they don't uphold these kind of qualities. So they're very hesitant to shift away from that because they get, rejected by their own gender.
Maybe a final question then. As a feminist studying gender equality, I'm really interested in the work you're doing, but I'm also wondering, and whether you found it working with young men, whether you see some resistance towards the feminist movement right now, especially in light of what's happening around Me Too, and whether it would be harder for you to get across with the message if you were a woman yourself.
Yeah, I think that looking at all of your question there, yes, I think sometimes the word feminism might scare some men from that conversation as well. I think sometimes they feel like they're going to be attacked for being male. So this is kind of some of the narrative that I get from particularly younger boys who seem like they want to have this conversation, but they feel like they recognize that something's wrong here. Something is not right with the way it's being done, but they're hesitant to engage the conversation. They don't want to feel shamed. They don't want to feel blamed, and they don't want to feel attacked for not knowing what they should do as a different, or not knowing even what parts of this they can embody, or what parts of masculinity they shouldn't embody. It's such a new, I think, concept, and especially for young men to get their head around. They're not quite sure how to do this yet. expressions like toxic masculinity and things like that are very shaming and very blaming kind of terminology that create resistance for men to come to this conversation. We need to be able to create spaces where we can engage men and engage this conversation, and they're going to need to feel safe coming to that table. So I think it's important where we create opportunities and dialogue that is inviting and sort of, where people can be willing to explore what this might look like rather than be told, you're doing everything wrong, that very shamed kind of approach to it. I'm not sure if that answers the question there, but
yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm satisfied. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you everyone for watching us. We're going to wrap up this session to give everyone enough time to move to the next panel, which will start in 4 minutes. Thank you, Tao, and thank you, Kyrie.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.